Okay, we're going to start rebuilding this pump. This one was used in the granite stone business, so there's a lot of granite dust in here. I'm going to take apart the bottom. Alright, today we're going to take apart this pump and rebuild this 2-inch sandpiper pump. I'm going to take, this is using the stone job, so there's a lot of dry granite in here. I want to remove the bottom end first and clean it out before I put it on the bench. So I'm going to first take apart these bolts on the top, and of course I need some air. Alright, so we're going to take these bolts out. So I'm going to take the rest of this off. Take off before we move any further the air end. That'll be. That's going on. Reverse. That reverse? Hold on a second. All right. So the air end is going to be the shuttle assembly and the pilot valve, which is kind of the heart of the air operation of the pump. This needs to be carefully cleaned out and checked to see which parts need to be rebuilt. Mainly the spool and the pilot valve. So that, and be careful with the proc switch. So before I move this pump any further, I'm going to take off the pilot valve here and this shuttle inside there. All right. Got all the bolts out of both diaphragms, except for this one. Before I do that, I'm going to remove this bottom piece. I've got both the cup sides, the ball cup, out. I don't want to disassemble these arms where they connect to the central body, because it's just extra work later. I'm going to just wash it out as is. If I wanted to, I'd have to take out these two bolts, but it may need then new gaskets in there. So what I'm going to do is just give it some taps and loosen this up and break this off. Okay, now I've taken the outer diaphragms off, and I've down to just the diaphragms themselves in the central shaft. Notice how it moves back and forth like such. It will just rotate. So they're sandwiched together with an inner and outer plate. That's the inner plate in here, and it's sandwiched with this outer plate. So you need to grab both of the outer nuts, or including the outer. If the diaphragm is pushed out, you can grab the outer edge of the outer nut, with a larger pipe wrench. Either will usually work, but they need to be twisted at the same time. Somebody on one side has to hold one while you do the other and twist them apart. The one part that does come in the kit is this oil cup inside here, but the bearing sleeve, which is a brass or bronze sleeve inside here, this is a 1-inch shaft. It slides in there. In between here is this bumper that goes between the housing and the inner diaphragm plate. What I'm concerned with is with the wear that's in those brass bearings. They have to be pushed out and replaced with new ones. So without the bumper in place, I'm going to put the shaft back in here and test the play. Hear that? It's like got some play up and down. Not as bad as some I've seen, so it could be reused. But you see that, you feel that play up and down. We should replace those bronze bushings. So that's one thing we're going to order and replace. Those are not, they're not come in a kit, so I'm going to have to order those. The other part is this pin gets replaced. It comes in the air end kit. So these come right out with a nut driver or something. Okay. Diaphragm plates are sandwiched together to hold the diaphragm. To remove them, I like to just take this, put it on a vise on the square one, and then use a chain wrench to remove the top plate. So it's fairly easy to do it that way. This is one of them Irwin vice grip chain pliers. So hopefully I can break the rust on this thing. Here we go. Give it a shot. I'm going the wrong direction. That's what helped. All right, I'm going the right direction here. It bound up pretty good with the rust, but eventually I got it to break loose from the bottom plate. So I had rust and rubber holding it on. All right, as you can see, the thread part came out of the diaphragm, and the diaphragm plate actually is threaded onto that, and that can stay put. It'll just be reassembled this way with some grease when I get it reassembled the pump, so I don't have to really unthread that to that. Well, the next plate that I'm going to do, the diaphragm isn't on, but it works the same way. I would clamp this in here and push the diaphragm down and turn the plate out. All right. Okay, and then the second one came out easier. Don't lose the little flat washer that goes between the rod and this plate, and you can see the mark where the bumper goes, the bumper that goes in between this and the main housing body. So that gets that diaphragm off. So we're ready to put new diaphragms on, but we're going to wash up the entire pump before we do that with a power washer. I'm going to remove now the O-ring. This is going to get new O-ring cups, the grease cups there. Grease cups. They go on both sides, right here and right here. Okay, I'm also going to remove the pins that push the pilot valve back and forth. These pins, when the diaphragm inner plate reaches all the way in on each stroke, is what actuates the following cycle. And I'll explain it right here. The inner plate right there, you can even see a mark on it, pushes, as it finishes the stroke, pushes that pin here in. This pin inside here is what pushes what we call the pilot valve in the pilot valve air assembly. The pilot valve gets pushed in one direction, switches the pilot stream, that switches the main air shuttle valve, which changes the direction of exhausting one side and pressurizing the other side, which is the heart of the action of the pump. These come in the air end kit. There's actually an O-ring inside here that gets replaced with a new O-ring, a new pin, and a new bushing. The other part that I'm putting in are the grease cups, as well as a new pilot valve. This pilot valve is very sticky and old. We're just going to put a new one in with a new air end kit. The O-rings are right here and here. Though sometimes they can be replaced if it's tight enough, so it may be able to be cleaned out. Once I clean this up fully, I'll decide whether this part has to be replaced or not. All right, before I attempt to push the bushings out, I usually like to just give myself a little more breathing room to take it out and round a little bit of material off these two bumps and this inner side of here a little bit. I'll show you how I do that. It doesn't need a whole lot, just enough so that I don't have the bushing stuck in here. If you have a die grinder, it might work a little better. A Craftsman 7/8 inch socket is what I'm going to use to drive out the bronze sleeve bearing right here. If it's enough that it grabs the edges, but it doesn't go over the sides of it, so I can. That drove it out and drove it into the middle part. Now it's sitting in the middle down in here. So what I grab is with a needle nose, and I can grab it, turn it to the side, and hopefully I've taken enough material out I can grab it out. Pause it a second. Now, come on. I might have to go back in there with my grinder and take a little bit more material off so I can get this out. Got it out. So just a little bit of material remover. Like if I had a die grinder, it'd be better, but it's just quite a snug fit. That's how you can get the first one out. The second one, you can just put an extension on and drive it all the way through and out, so you don't have to do it twice. second.
Close. There you go.
And that gets both the bushings out. The new bushings get tapped back in with a little grease. I usually just lightly emery paper it with some fine 400 or 600 paper first to polish it up, or emery or Scotch-Brite, and then some grease. Tap them back in until they're flush to the inner edge, and then the new oil cups, grease cups go in before you re-grease and put the new parts back together. So this will all get power washed now, and we'll follow up a little bit later in the video.
There you go.
All right, I took apart the air body. The side, one side has the proc switch on the end cap, and the other side is blind. The two bumpers came out, and we noticed that this main shuttle is completely scored up. So both parts are basically scored up. If this part is bad, they come as a set. To push that out, I used a 1-inch OD PVC pipe. Tapping, it should be able to come right out, because it's some O-rings with some lubricated grease on that holds it on. So here's the sleeve and spool assembly. New O-rings and new sleeve and spool will come in the air-in kit that will go in this. One final thing. Many times on these pumps I include a bumper. The bumper on the proc side goes like this, where this helps center the sleeve, so there's a mark there from where it pushed the sleeve into position. Notice the proc switch should be recessed underneath the bumper so that it can sense, but the shuttle does not hit that. I often like to place in route out by hand. I usually do it with a larger hole in the bumper that gives more air to breathe around the proc switch. Once we introduce the proc switch, sometimes it causes a little stutter on one side of the pump when it reaches high pressure in the filter press. So by routing out that area, I've ported that area out, it can breathe a little freer on that side versus the other side where there's no proc switch. That can stay the same with the standard bumper. So what I've done is now created a little more breathing room, because it ends up causing a little suction or pressure when the shuttle pushes toward one side at high pressure and slow strokes. So at the last cycle of the press. Okay, we're going to start assembling the pump with all new parts. We're replacing the bearing sleeves, so they need to be placed in these pockets. Before I hammer that in carefully, I just want some lithium grease or something to lubricate the surfaces so I can be tapped in. All right. There should be no burrs inside here so that it doesn't catch and create a lot of drag to pound it in. You want to carefully tap this in, keeping a socket or some piece of steel that's circular centered over it so it doesn't damage the inner lip. And then tap this down real quick. Here I go slower. I just want it to be flush to the inner edge in there where the grease cup's deadhead. So that's still got a little bit of a lip on it. I go until it's just flush. There it is. And if you notice, it's got a pocket in here for the grease cup. The grease cup goes like so, with the wiper facing out versus that way. So the grease cup comes with the air-in kit. There it's got a new grease cup and a new bearing. The bearings do not come on any of the kits. They have to be ordered separately. usually when we disassembled this pump, there was a lot of play in those bearings, so they needed to be replaced. The 1-inch steel shaft that slides in should be fairly smooth sliding but tight inside to side play. The other thing we have to install on this before we go any further is the pins that come on the air kit as well. I already put the O-ring in there. This is the thicker style, the newer style of heavier duty pin. That gets screwed in here with the socket, the 3/4 inch socket. Alright, watch yourself. Alright. So that's done, and now that's done on both sides. Alright, the next thing we're going to be putting in here is the diaphragms and the plates and the shaft. Grease the shaft, put the bumper on the inside, the inner diaphragm plate and the outer diaphragm plate are tightened on the shaft and rod. We'll install it into the pump now. Slide into these bearings unless I nicked them up when we pounded them in. We'll try to get this in. There it is. Yeah, it must have been a bump, a little bit of a bump on that one. The inner diaphragm plate has a bumper and a washer. The washer goes toward the diaphragm like this. Actually, you can see where it goes here, and then there's a bumper that goes on next. So the bumper goes like so. And then this would go through in this order. So this, we have to compress the diaphragm between the two plates. The washer goes here. Right? So here's our diaphragm, bumper, and I want to put some anti-seize on the threads so that it doesn't seize up on us taking the part down the road. Here. I'm going to take this one and pre-tighten it on the vise. Diaphragm, so it's a vice grip chain wrench to tighten the diaphragm. It shouldn't take too much to get it to squeeze and compress that rubber. So that should do it. Now the little steel washer goes on this plate next. Here. Anti-seize, and then this will get threaded into here. Then we take 2 wrenches and tighten both sides simultaneously, one in one direction, one in the other, in order to tighten that final tight. So with one adjustable wrench on either side, I can tighten these up. Should do it. That's good enough. Now the diaphragms are tightened in. However, I'm not lined up in holes, so I have to either back it off or retighten it a little bit until I line up both the holes on the Now the holes are lined up on both sides. Alright. Now we can continue to put the diaphragm covers back on these two and reassemble this pump. Get a cover on. We put the diaphragms on. These 2 bolts in the bottom actually have to get access with a short 3-inch extension and a ratchet to get through here. You have to put it through to get these 4 on 2 on either side that don't have nuts on them. The other ones we just put through and tightened them all after we aligned the diaphragms. Next we're going to install these felt, or they're not felt, paper gaskets that go between these arms that attach to the diaphragms and these 3/4 inch bolts that are going to come through here and tighten it. So we're going to put the 3/4 inch bolts on both sides up through and tighten it. Okay, I've got the bottom installed already. Then the bottom check valves go in like that. New gaskets on both sides of the metal saddles. They go like so. And then the last gasket goes on top, so it's sandwiched. This stainless steel plate is sandwiched in between a gasket on either side. Then the 2 balls go on top. Then our top discharge manifold goes on. I like to put a little anti-seize on all the bolts so that it can work in the future. Once there's anti-seize on all the bolts, then I can put the lock washer in the nuts and tighten them down with a 3/4 inch wrench. Instead of the anodized aluminum sleeve and spool that are both anodized aluminum, which they end up scoring a lot and sticking in cold air. In this application, I'm installing a bronze spool and stainless sleeve. I do like to lubricate them with dry film lubricant, which is a molybdenum disulfide spray. It goes almost like paint. I'm going to do a little bit on the sleeve, on the spool, and a tad in the sleeve. Let that start to dry a little bit, just a tad in here. The trick is, this stuff will actually be too thick for it to get in and move, so once it starts to dry a little bit, I like to get it in here and start moving it around so that it burnishes it in the walls. And when it fully dries, it'll still be able to slide. It should get really loose after a while. Otherwise, the tolerance tightens up too much and you can't get it in. So I keep working it, and the excess will work its way off. and it'll leave a really fine layer. Actually, molybdenum disulfide can lubricate down to a few molecules thick, is what they say anyway online. So now it's starting to slide better. If I work it back and forth like this, eventually you'll notice it's really, really smooth. The more it works, the finer it polishes itself in, and it moly bonds at the molecular level. So if I want to add it a second coat real quick. Really sluggish. I've done it even when it's dry. It's just I just had to work it in very, very thoroughly by hand until it wears its way. It wears itself in. You notice it's got a super tight tolerance. There it goes. So once it's now dried itself off, the carrier evaporates, leaving the molybdenum disulfide dry material embedded in the stainless and brass, acting as a lubricant. It's a really nice dry lubricant, so it doesn't attract any dirt or dust. Then, to get this sleeve and spool inside the body, I like to just lubricate lightly the O-rings, very lightly. They're just an assembly grease, basically, so that it can be pushed in. A little bit on the start of this, where I'm going to pound it in, so it works. It can be pushed in safely. Oops, that's so slippery now it can come out by itself. It doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be in to push this in. You can get this in fully. If you can't push that in fully, just use the cover and screws with the bumper, and that'll properly space it actually. So it doesn't, you can allow that the bumper will center it where it needs to be. I only need to use actually 2 bolts. I'll take it back off and with the spooling, work it back and forth. That will get the sleeve fully centered where it belongs. There it is, centered right where it belongs. Alright, this, see, even falls under its own weight. That's right where you want it. Alright, one side of this gets the standard bumper. The bumper has to face the hole, the notch. A gasket. And a cap. The cap has to be oriented so that that faces the hole. Pause it for a second. Okay, last thing is the other side of this pump has a proximity switch to count the strokes. I have a bumper. They originally come like this. This one I've intentionally enlarged with just a Dremel by hand. I actually enlarged the hole, giving more breathing room for the spool to operate. With the Prox in here, it actually takes away some of the gap, so I basically ported it so that the air flows better. So if you see one of these on a pump with the Prox, you know that it goes on this side, and there's nothing wrong with it. These actually don't wear out. The bumpers really technically never wear out, even though you get new ones with the kit. So the bumper is going to be oriented with the notch again toward the hole where the air comes through, and with the gasket, and then this again oriented with this notch this way, and then here, and then we just tighten the bolts down, and that takes care of the Prox. Oh, one last thing before I do this again. The Prox is recessed below the edge of the bumpers. You notice on a smaller one, you can see this one is probably a little deeper than I would go. It almost looks like an 1/8 inch. you can be at, probably a 1/16 of an inch and be fine. I'm hoping that that sensor will still sense the prox, still sense the bush, the spool. But if it doesn't, you can just tighten it in a little bit more. But I'm going to go ahead and try it like this. So it's a little recessed more than I normally would like it. It can't be too far, it won't see the spool. If it's too close, the spool will hit it. So again, we put the parts back in, orient them all the way they belong, and then tighten the bolts down. Okay. We put a new pilot valve in, well lubricated. I took this out and put new grease or more grease on there inside the pilot valve. Get it to settle in. There's a gasket below and above this plastic piece. That hole would line up with this one. This one's got a gasket on here, which is going to stay put. Then the 4 bolts that can be tightened down with a 1/2-inch wrench. Don't over tighten them because the ends of these are aluminum and the plastic in between there and rubber can compress enough that I've seen customers tighten them so much they've broken off the end of them. So with the gaskets in place, it just has to be snugged down. And snug just like that. That's all I really need to do. If it does leak a little air, you can always come back and retighten it.